The views and opinions expressed by the following program are those of the host, guests, and callers and are not necessarily those of this station or Webster Rock Hill Ministries, its management, or other hosts or underwriting sponsors. Programs presented by KWRH-LP are for educational and entertainment purposes only.
We have MK Stallings in studio. Welcome, MK. Glad to have you here this morning.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, really glad that you're here.
Now, MK is founder of Urb Arts, which is located a couple blocks south of Crown Candy.
Who hasn't been to Crown Candy?
Right.
If they haven't been to Crown Candy, they are definitely brand new to St. Louis.
And if they know where Crown Candy is, then they know where Urb Arts is because
I know
it's
where it
straight
is.
down the street, a couple blocks on the left-hand side, the east side of the
I think
street.
I've actually been in there when we were, I think it was with me and Chris Mullen came there for a jazz concert. Somebody was like having a rent party.
Yeah, it's possible. There's like two galleries in that area. One is the 14th Street Artist Community. That's a property that's owned by Peter Sparks, and he works with it's an artist guild, the Zuka Artist Guild, as well as just different artists in the community. And then Urb Arts is also down there. So sometimes because we do similar work from time to time, people might end up in his space and get a chance to experience the wonderful jazz artists who are in there. I don't know if they do much in terms of blues, but I know that they do support some of the black artists who are in the region who've been putting in work for decades.
It was great though.
Yeah,
it was absolutely that area. I tell you is one of St. Louis' best kept secrets.
Yes, it is.
And when you get there, it just has a totally different feel altogether. It's like you're in this little bubble, this little art bubble when you get in there. You can't help but be inspired.
Absolutely. And a lot of their work was done by Old North St. Louis Restoration Group. So when they were founded back in, I think it was 1981, they wanted to do a lot of work in that part of St. Louis, partly because there was a lot of low-income housing, and plus the neighborhood had just fallen apart.
Exactly.
I mean, that was like a thriving business district back in the 50s and 60s, so the mid-20th century. But then they made some changes structurally to that street, filling it in as opposed to it being a street that you can drive through. They made it more of a mall, so it became the 14th Street Mall. And then all the businesses on that mall just died. And so this
bad planning, huh?
Bad planning, but you think that it's a good idea because you want to encourage kind of a pedestrian lifestyle, but unless the residents, the people who live in that area are for that, then it will fall apart. And it fell apart. And it took a neighborhood organization like Old North St. Louis Restoration Group, as well as them partnering with the Rise. Well, now they're known as Rise, before, but RHCDA a long time ago. And from that point forward, they were able to do a lot of the renovation work, the redevelopment work that makes those two blocks really picturesque. And obviously the work isn't done because right around it you see a lot of decaying buildings that are just falling apart, and unfortunately you have to have people at the table who are interested in that level of development to finish the job, because you can only do so much.
Right.
And Rise and Old North St. Louis Restoration Group should be applauded for the work they put forward to help stabilize at least the business area that surrounds Crown Candy.
Absolutely. There's a chess park up there where chess is played and taught. It's really very cool. And matter of fact, David Gordon, who was on the show several weeks ago, he had a area dedicated at Urb Arts where he was working there and did some display things there, and we'll continue to do that, I think.
Absolutely.
And I think what's so interesting, MK, is you do. What you're doing is you're trying to appeal to a different group of urbanites, who see the city not as that, like you said, not as that, the surrounding is really decayed and I'm afraid, I'm concerned to go there, but really look at that as like a little enclave, and say, what, that's a destination.
Absolutely.
And it's almost like retraining the mind. It's not like the whole city has to look this particular way, but there are, in our region, it's this destination, it's this pedestrian mall.
That's right.
Well, you said it's like an oasis.
Yes.
In that area.
It is.
And I would love to see, and I know that you were talking about this oasis to grow
Yes.
and take over what's surrounding the area there. So you've been there since, I guess, 2001.
Well, actually, we've been in that location since 2014, but organizationally, I founded Urban Artists Alliance back in 2001. Our DBA, the thing that we go by for the general public,
Doing business as
is Urb Arts. It's a much shorter name, and plus
much
it gets us away from absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely hip.
It was a part of the rebrand that happened roughly sometime between 2010 and 2013.
Oh yeah, that's right. Now they call it sexy.
Oh well, yeah, there you go. Yes, it's a much sexier title. And plus, people hear the word art and then they begin to understand more about what we do.
So
Yeah.
it says here on the website, the animating idea behind Urban Artists Alliance was the concept of social arts where poets, writers, actors, musicians, and visual artists would create art that reflect the conditions and possibilities of their communities. This kind of art is not apolitical. It challenges, disrupts, and tells truth about society from the artist's perspective. Talk a little bit more about that.
That's exactly right. So we're a part of, I think, a tradition that was born out of the 1960s with the Black Arts movement. A little bit before then, you had the Beats with Jack Kerouac and people like that who were able to just use their art to really challenge, right? And so since we come out of this Black Arts movement tradition, it becomes imperative for us to create a space where artists can experiment, can have their voices be heard, and sometimes it pays off. Sometimes people actually buy the art, but other times people are just simply are able to exhibit their work and to find new audiences for what they want to do. So we're very much so about art that hopefully speaks for itself, but art that speaks, and artists who can speak for it if necessary, but certainly art that challenges. And when we talk about disrupting what's happening in society, we're talking about instances where people have an idea about culture and dominant culture. This is the sociologist speaking now, right? They have an idea about culture and dominant culture. And they also have an idea about those elements that they don't feel represent the norm. And sometimes they call those elements deviant, the things that deviate from the norm. It should not be included in the central conversations that we have about our world. But when we don't include them, we marginalize them. So there is a long tradition of individuals who've been marginalized. And so what they've done, instead of trying to integrate into this conversation, they just try to set up their own shop. So that's where you would have someone like Amiri Baraka or Sonia Sanchez or Nikki Giovanni who just simply say, you know what, it's okay. I'll sell my books in the bookstore. Someone like Hakeem Al-Hubudi who would come along and say, okay, I will review your works so that we can have some sort of standard for art with the voices that we're speaking with. And this is all in the 1960s. So instead of trying to rely on mainstream culture or dominant culture just to kind of get by, you kind of make your own lane and you stay there for the purposes of developing your own canon, your own ideas of aesthetics, and just hopefully making a space for artists who may not want to conform to the norms or to dominant culture, but instead want to kind of experiment and find their own voice. And sometimes that voice is in resistance or in response to those things that you find objectionable in society.
So not getting validation by not getting on the highway of the mainstream culture, but getting validation by, okay, I'm going to carve this path because this is the direction I want to go.
Absolutely, through community.
And you're speaking with the voice of the people that are going through exactly what you're going through.
That's exactly.
It's like when we talk about education, a lot of times, and as Black people, we question, and please forgive me, Arnold, this is no offense towards white people, but it's just a statement that I'm
no
getting ready
offense
to say.
taken.
Okay, but it's like, why do we allow the enemy to educate our children? Because why do we allow white people to teach us our history?
Right.
Because the thing of it is that we all know there's going to only be a certain few that's going to get there. We're not going to break into either those that were a super revolutionary, right, whose train of thought was cut off. We're not going to teach those. You're not going to be taught those kind of things.
That's right.
We're not going to be taught about all of the inventors that came along, during that particular period of time, the Reconstruction period. We're not going to hear those things.
No.
We're going to only hear a few things. And by getting away from that mainstream, we're able to broaden that understanding.
Well, and let me piggyback on that because, and now speaking as a white guy.
Okay, speak as a white guy.
It's, the history that I've been taught is not the complete history. And part of the reason and the guests that we have on this show are to open up those doors of history that maybe other people don't know about or are not aware of or have not investigated far enough to know that, hey, there's more to the history of who I am as a white guy here living in Webster Groves than what I've been taught. And not saying that what I've been taught has been completely wrong, it's just been incomplete. And so it's up to me now to find out what those incomplete areas are, fill in some gaps so I get a better understanding of a historical viewpoint of our country, of our state, of our city, of our area, and who was involved in those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
And you have to first be aware that there is that gap, you know, because there are a lot of people that just go, well, this is history and this is all it was. And those people had nothing to do with anything, and so there's the wall set up right there to say, nope, the only history that exists is with people that look like, and whoever's writing the history book.
Because we're talking about values.
That's right.
And whether or not we value certain facts.
Right.
And if you believe that, okay, so speaking, let's say from a scientific standpoint, there's a notion of independent variables and dependent variables, right? So dependent variables very much so need the independent variable to kind of act, to do something, because it's an impact. It's an outcome, right? So there has to be something that triggers something else. And so some people might say, okay, this might have happened in history, but what sort of impact did it really have for the social context? What sort of impact did it really have for the world? If it's negligible, then we can exclude it because we don't feel like it had any sort of meaningful value for our society. Now, that's interpretive. And if your interpretation doesn't allow for or doesn't include various kinds of outcomes as valuable, then you can disregard it, and you can even use a scientific language in trying to justify your position. But ultimately, we're talking about how people interpret facts as well as how we measure impact. And so I think that from our tradition, for example, when we think about the Black Arts Movement, what that looked like in St. Louis was the Black Artist Group. And you have individuals whose work have not always been recognized or appreciated. So a lot of the artists that you might see at 14th Street Artist Community, they were contemporaries or a part of that Black Artist Group. But that Black Artist Group failed because of their more activist members in their body. And unfortunately, they were funded or propped up by foundations that didn't agree with that. They didn't think that's how society should move forward. So they defunded their operation, and because they weren't able to figure out a way to be sustainable, they had to shutter their operation. And again, a nonprofit organization whose main mission was to try to do things for the community and be a voice for the community and allow the community to find its voice, they had to stop what they were doing because they simply didn't have enough money to pay their bills as well as to pay employees and things of that nature. And again, how do you measure their value? And if you feel like what they're doing is not valuable, of course you're going to stop funding it. Of course you're not going to support their operations in any sort of meaningful financial way. And that's what we're seeing now. We see a lot, and we continue to see projects that might be defunded or under-resourced, partly because we don't think that what that particular organization or that particular initiative is doing is having the sort of reach and impact that we want to see in the region.
So are they looking at outcomes of what's actually coming out, and they're comparing that to what they think it should be? Because maybe what they think it should be is incorrect, because, an artist is going to express what's inside them. And many times, here's the pull and tug between artists is I produce something that is from within me, or I produce something in which I can get some money.
That's right.
and have a living. And it's that juxtaposition that is constantly pulling on artists. And finally, you look at social realism back in the 30s, the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and those folks who were painting back then, they had the same issue. They were very, they were political in their
Very much so.
artist statements in what they were painting.
Right. And when we look at the difference in artists, it's kind of like the difference of, do I paint, a vase of flowers, or do I paint a picture of, a brother in the street being attacked by the police,
Right.
Right. and when you're looking at the difference in that, I mean, you're one is that social voice is saying, if I look out my window, and maybe you do or don't, and this is what I see, or this is what has been told me. I've heard this story, and what I'm doing is I'm depicting someone else's story to me, so people can visualize it. Again, it goes back to what you're saying, MK. What value
do we assign
to that? That's very good language. What value do we assign to that? And then from that assignment, we determine whether or not it should even have wings.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So do you provide an outlet for people to express things through poetry? We'll get into poetry probably after the break.
Sure.
But in poetry, in art, provide that venue to help them discover and enrich themselves versus in a productive manner versus a non-productive manner.
Absolutely. Yes. So if an artist doesn't have the space to experiment, then how does the artist grow? And a lot of the experimentation happens in real time in front of people. It would be great to just kind of go away, like how like a John Coltrane might, right? And go into like a little house and just create music while his wife, took care of the home and took care of the kids and things of that nature, just go away. But because of what he was doing as an artist, he was given that space, and because of his family, he was given that space, and some wonderful things can happen. But we're talking about artists who may not have a space to experiment. They don't have names for themselves. So when they release a work, they don't have a market that will embrace them. So we're talking about people who are very much so at the beginning of their journeys, and they don't really know all of what they want to say and how they want to say it, whether it's through visual or through poetry or whatever the case may be. So they need to have a safe space for that expression, even if it's at times violent rhetoric, even if it's at times things that might be challenging or things that need to be smoothed out or rethought or thought more deeply about, but they need to have that. And once they have it, and once they kind of figure it out, I think they can produce it for a public that would be ready to receive it and may even change as a result of its introduction to that public. But first, they have to be given that space. So that would be like school. So for some people who may not be classically trained in anything, they still need like a studio time. They need a time to have the space to experiment. And we know with experimentation, the goal is you have a hypothesis in mind, you're working on some stuff, and then eventually, the thing that you hypothesize might actually manifest itself in the way that you intend, or the way that you hoped, or the way that you suspect. And then when it happens, then magic. But man, how many trials do you have to go through in order to get to that point? And so I see Urb Arts as a space that does that kind of work. And when we talk about the Black artist group of the 1960s, they allowed for that. I don't know how intentional it was, but they allowed for it because they had a space for it. And so for us, that's what we allow. So it may not be the space for the finished product. It's more of the workshop where you're working it out and trying to figure out what you want to do. And eventually you might get there.
This is KWRH-LP 92.9 FM. You're listening to MK Stallings, and you're listening to In Tune. If you have a question that you'd like to text in and ask MK, it's 314-736-4510. When folks just show up and they arrange with you, they want to do some things, you just don't go, yeah, there's your space over there. You're not disconnected from them.
No.
What kind of mentorship or encouragement, leadership do you offer them?
A lot of it is just in conversation. And so I kind of get a sense of where they are. Like right now, while I'm sitting here with you, one of, I guess he sees me as a mentor, but somebody that I've worked with, a young poet, a young event organizer, producer, who's now also a staff member of Urb Arts, is setting up some chairs for an event that's going to happen later tonight. It's a rental, and he's also vacuuming some things and what have you. But he calls me sensei, right, out of that like martial arts tradition. And he sees Urb Arts as a dojo, a place where he can kind of work some things out. So a lot of times it just comes through conversation. And my hope is, if not in a formal sense, at least through our conversation and through any sort of role modeling that I can provide, that they can kind of see what they want, they can see my errors, they can see my mistakes, and see my successes, and then just begin to pattern, whatever they want to accomplish after what they see, after what they observe. So it's really through the relationship. It's through talking. It's laying out ideas. It's listening. It's a lot of listening, hearing whatever ideas they have, and then offering some feedback that I hope will be constructive so that they can move forward in a way that's productive for them. I see this as a launch pad and certainly not a final destination. So my hope is that they launch and do something wonderful, based on the experiences that they had in this space.
I love that. The Oasis Launchpad.
I know. We definitely have to trademark that name. Okay, write that down.
I love the Launchpad.
I do. I like that.
That's great.
And really, that's kind of in tune with what we are here. Mm-hmm. We're really a launch pad for people in media, people who want to come and express themselves, and we do allow community people to come in and produce shows and be on the air. And again, it's that opportunity. We've had young musicians who've walked in here with their guitar, and they sit right there where you are, and they've got a mic at the guitar, and they've got a mic over here at their voice, and
wonderful.
That's right. They get a chance to play to a wider audience. I mean, where would we be? Where would Mr. Comedian, who sits across the table from me, be if he couldn't every Friday pepper us with some crazy humor?
Now you're calling me Mr. Comedian now? What? I've never been called a comedian.
That's your new calling. You just don't realize it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that is funny because you stick around, though, you're going to hear some really silly humor, as we go into our 12 o'clock hour. I just want to warn you.
This is Mr. Comedian Arnold Stricker with Ellie Wharton of In Tune. You're listening to KWRHLP 92.9 FM, your community radio station in Webster Groves, Missouri. May be soggy outside, but we're having some solid conversation here, Ellie.
We definitely are. And, I just want to go back just a second. The promo that you just heard from Taft Harris for Seminary Plots, which airs from 3 to 5, we heard today, unfortunately, that his Nana passed.
Oh.
Yeah, and he is on the road right now heading home to go deal with Nana and situations. And the thing about it is I know that just last week he had to go out of town to take his kids back to college. And so I know he just came back this week and then has to turn right back around and head, south again. So we just want to, just give him a shout out, let his family know that we are with him. I typed him a little email and I told him that we're definitely with you. I said, if your car gets a little musty and your drinks start to go quickly, we're with you.
There you go.
There you go. We're there.
You're listening to Arnold Stricker and Ellie Wharton on In Tune. We have MK Stallings in studio. We've been talking about the Urb Arts program that he has established up in Old North City and Old North St. Louis, 2 blocks south of Crown Candy.
Crown Candy.
And MK, we talked about art a lot, but your main art area is poetry. And, I know we talked off air and we were having a great discussion off air, which too bad we weren't on air.
Yeah, but we're going to replicate that.
We're going to replicate
and actually,
that.
MK, you look more like you would be a sculptor.
Ah.
Has anyone ever told you that?
No, I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
Yeah, you have that solid look. Like, if you put something in your hands, it's going to come out.
Shape it.
It's
right.
That's right.
All right. Well, just not to focus too much on sociology, but we often do talk about shaping. We just shape in a different kind of way.
That's right.
And everybody who participates in this world, right, by being an actor, by being someone who does things, we shape. And so so I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
because even with poetry, you are shaping a conversation.
Totally, absolutely.
Yeah, how are you guys doing that?
So I started writing poetry, or the first poem I ever performed was when I heard LL Cool J, a rapper, do I'm Bad. And so I was so inspired that I started freestyling. Now I'm pretty sure it was trash, but because I was 7 years old, and so I was just rhyming different words. I don't know what I was saying, but that was the first time I did anything that was remotely poetic. And from there, I began to maybe write when I was in 4th grade, and then got more serious about writing. So really, my first encounter with poetry was in hip hop. As an MC, somebody who was rapping. And so that was around middle school. I have 2 brothers. My oldest brother kind of honored that idea, and because he also liked to make music, produce, make beats, things of that nature, we were able to collaborate, and we put out like a little CD, and as well as some tapes. It was a CD and an assortment of tapes back in the mid 90s. So after we were doing a lot of work for a couple of summers, we were able to release some music. So really, my start as a poet began as me being a rapper, an MC, and thinking about whole notes and 16 bars and crafting work that fit within this musical time frame that would allow me then to do a chorus, and then maybe some kind of a bridge that might be creative, but oftentimes a verse, chorus, done, that kind of thing. And so that was the start for me. And thinking about how to compose a song helped me think about poetry as composition or compositional work. It's not so, like, some forms are really short forms. Let's say if we were to write a haiku, it's just 3 lines or what have you, right? Just 17 syllables. And then there are longer works such as the Villanelle that would be 19 lines, but a lot of repetition and things of that nature. But what the poet who's a rapper has to do is much more along the lines of the epic poem or the long form poem, where you are telling this story over several lines. And if you think of 16 bars potentially as 16 lines, that can be a pretty massive poem over time, because most people do about 2 or 3 verses. So you might end up having about like 48 lines worth of poetry, at the end of your song, if you are doing a rap composition. So for me, moving from writing raps to these kind of longer form poems wasn't as much of a stretch. It was much more about getting away from the demanding rhythm that goes with emceeing, with rap, the kind of cadence based articulation of your ideas that were at times limiting, because it was also about rhyming. Like, you had to rhyme in order to be an effective rapper and be on time and on beat, right? So those are things that just helped me, transition into being more of a poet that participates in the oral tradition. And then it also gives me space to be able to help poets figure out the rhythm and the soundscape that they want to create with their work, because ultimately, as a poet, you're creating worlds. And if you write a poem that's long enough, the next step is that you have to honor the world that you're creating and honor the audience that you are inviting into this space, so that people can, see all of the world as you've envisioned it. And if you can effectively do that, then you've not only are you a poet, but you're tapping into the tradition of the poet as the prophet, the poet as the storyteller. And that, to me, is the height of poetry, being able to connect with a long and rich oral tradition that goes beyond some of the forms that we might have learned over time, but cuts to the heart of community and talking to people in a way that resonates.
That's interesting, because if you compose something that is very brief but encompasses some really rich thinking, you're really utilizing every single word in a manner that it's important to create that world.
Absolutely. The other thing to keep in mind is that you'd have people who were, I would say, poetic, like a James Baldwin, right? When James Baldwin wrote The Fire Next Time, every word counted. And for poets, we value words. It is about having the minimal number of words and having maximum meaning. So even if you have longer works, it's still about making every word count. So whether it's short or long form, you absolutely have to have words that grab people by the collar and bring them closer to you. And if you don't have that kind of work, then you got to go back to the lab and rework what you've done so that it can be more resonant and perhaps more relevant to audiences.
Now, were you encouraged when you were in school? You were 5'7", writing poetry?
Not really. And I would say most public school educational spaces don't necessarily do that kind of work. Mm-hmm. I mean, the teacher has a different kind of demand, right? They have to make sure that the student learns certain things before the end of the semester. They're not there to necessarily nurture their creative side. And so a lot of the young people that we come across, they find it necessary to be in a poetry club or to do something creative, because otherwise they wouldn't be heard. They wouldn't be experienced in the ways that they want to be experienced by people. So it was much the same kind of experience for me. I mean, everything that I did in hip hop was not nurtured by my school experience by any means. But what does happen, obviously, is that you learn a lot of stuff about life. You hopefully learn some things about grammar. You learn some things about whatever subject matter that you're taking, and then that can kind of support the creative work by giving you content to explore.
And, I think what you just said, MK, is really important. Oftentimes, people don't see the real intellect side of an artist. They only see the creative side, but they don't understand that there is a lot of intellect that goes into, like you said, the research of it, understanding words, the uses of words, the cadences, and even just the different style. So you're not just getting up there and saying any old thing. What made me think about something when you were talking, and being the age that I am, my first introduction to rap was, like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. But
right.
in West Philadelphia, born and raised.
Classic.
But you know what? But you're right.
Yeah.
When I thought about what you were saying and I reflected back on that song, it embodied all of the things that you were talking about, because even then it painted a picture. It used the cadence. It had the rhyme. Mm-hmm. It had a story behind it. Yep. It had a beginning. It had an end, and you were able to see yourself in that poem, because that's really what it was. It was a poem that was put to words and song, and mm-hmm. and it actually, it did become mainstream.
Yeah.
But I think it was the introduction to a lot of people.
Yeah,
to rap.
So for many people who didn't really hear much of it when it first hit the scene in the late 1970s with Rapper's Delight. I mean, there were other works, right? But the 1970s was representing a marriage of disco music and this emerging rap culture. People always talked on records. I mean, if you're talking about Barry White, he talked on records.
That's right.
And then there were very like lyrical musings. Let's say from like the first Chicago record, right? There was a lyricism that's present in some of these songwriters, and they do great work. So when we cut to, let's say, someone like Fresh Prince, Will Smith was able to make a name for himself because, one, he was a really competent MC. He understood how to rap to a beat and how to be engaging through the microphone, because it's a weird thing. You're in a studio, you're not looking at people, you're performing for walls, but your vocal performance still has to grab people, have to bring people in, and you can't really out-rap the content if the content is garbage. At some point it'll catch up with you, but if the content is really good and you know how to perform it, then it's going to propel you to whole new heights, hopefully. And so I think for people who got a chance to really experience hip-hop in the mainstream on a Monday night or whatever night of the week it was, it really kind of normalized hip-hop. It made it a part of popular culture in a way that it kind of was with Run DMC in the 1980s, but not fully, until someone like Will Smith was able to get that acceptance from the general public.
But you do know that rap actually has changed every wedding reception and every cruise. Okay, yes. Because when you go on a cruise, you are going to, if you go to the little club down there, if you stay late enough, okay, you are going to hear Rapper's Delight.
Yes.
some extremely inebriated person is going
you have
to
experience with it?
No, not me.
Say what?
Right.
Yeah, I've heard though.
Right. I mean, because you're speaking from like a place of personal experience. I don't know.
Yeah, I've been on a few cruises,
right,
but
yeah. So you've seen
I've
this.
seen it.
You've seen it.
That's right.
That's right. Okay.
Now
And I was always amazed.
Hey, because you were observing.
That's right.
Merely a participant observer. You just happened to be in the space.
That was participant Ellie Wharton.
That's right.
And you're here with Arnold Stricker. We're talking
Yes.
to MK Stallings on Intune.
Comedian Arnold Stricker.
Mr.
Comedian,
Yeah, Mr.
excuse me.
Yeah, right. MK, talk about the poetry slam, and you work with kids. We were up there the other day, and you were working with kids, and they were going to a poetry contest. And you got a poetry slam going. What is all that about?
So, poetry slam started in the 1980s. It was a way to take something that was done, a lot of bars, a lot of cafes for a long time, but then maybe inject some fun and make sure that the people are a part of the conversation. And if people like a poem, they'll give it a high score, because it's really about scoring work, and you randomly select people out of the audience to participate in this thing. And so the best poets who know how to engage audiences and put their words together in a way that would have maximum impact, they ended up winning the slam. And so it evolved from this mid 1980s way of having fun with words to an organization called Poetry Slam Inc. that puts on annual contests to youth organizations such as Youth Speaks, who have taken the Poetry Slam model that was developed and then made it appropriate for young poets, for young voices. And then you have other kind of regional efforts where people are doing whatever they can to inject energy and fun into poetry, and that's Poetry Slam. So Poetry Slam, just the general look of it, a poet has about 3 minutes to share his, her, they work in front of an audience. You select 5 judges from the audience randomly to score the work. We throw out the high and the low score. We add the 3 middle scores, so a perfect score can be 30. And oftentimes poets who compete in these spaces, they're looking for the 30. They want the perfect score. They want somebody to kind of like, hey, that's a great poem. And so we work with young people in the region. We show them some of the adult poets who compete in slams, who do that kind of work. And we oftentimes set up mentoring opportunities as well as teaching artist opportunities with these adult poets to work with some of the youth poets. We work with several high schools at one time, and we put them in a tournament together for those who want to participate. And then for like the last few years, Kirkwood has been dominant with Poetry Slam because of the work of a teacher by the name of Dominic Porter, Giannoski Porter, and then some of the talented teens that would flow through Kirkwood High School, but they've been absolutely dominant because he cares about poetry. He's a poet himself and an English teacher, and he wanted to make sure that their kids had the best experience. And then there are other high schools that we work with, such as Central Visual and Performing Arts or Grant Center Arts Academy. It is a bunch of others, from time to time. And so we convene this season for all these poets, and they have a good time. So we do that both at the youth level and at the adult level. At the end of the experience, we help them raise money to go on these trips, because these trips are very expensive. So, like, for example, to do the Youth Speaks event, it costs a pretty penny. And so we have to make sure that we have the money in place. And if the young people don't have, let's say, money for transportation, they have the money for transportation. And that's the real part of, to me, being an artist. Like, you can create a space, but at some point, if you can't get out on the road, if you can't do something, if you don't really have a platform to kind of launch your ambitions, then where does it go? It kind of dies, it withers, on the vine, because it never got plucked. And so our job is to make sure that it gets out there. So after you've developed the work, the next step is to hopefully get your work out there in a meaningful way.
And you mentioned off air between break about how you wished many times St. Louis and maybe other cities had the area cultivated to receive back people who had gotten their start here.
Absolutely. So the example I think about is Maya Angelou. Now, of course, her time in St. Louis was fraught with a lot of traumatic experience, right? But what if St. Louis was a region, that could be a home for a lot of some of the like internationally known, there's some people here, but some of the internationally known folks like a Maya Angelou, who's now of course deceased. So what would that look like? What sort of impact might she have had on conversations regarding, let's say, the poet laureate? What would that look like for conversations around how schools deal with poetry and the literary arts? And how we might honor those things. And I think that's an important conversation or idea to consider more fully. But the reason why she's not here is that for some reason, St. Louis wasn't able to retain that sort of that cultural phenomenon that she represented. And a lot of cities in the Rust Belt aren't able to do that. But the good news is that now we have the internet. We've kind of diversified how people receive their information, or places where people can go to kind of launch their brands or their identities or their art. And so my hope is that we'll continue as a region to figure out ways of evening the playing field so that you don't have to go to a major metropolitan area to be heard, to be felt, and to be able to make a living, that you can still be in St. Louis and still have an impact globally as well as locally, through your work and through the relationships that you would have to have in order to make things happen in a region. So that's what I would like to see. And I hope that Urb Arts can play a small part in retaining, talented people, creative people, because we know that for the region, we've seen a deep depopulation since the 1970s for St. Louis. Part of the reason why we think about, for example, Crown Candy. People come to Crown Candy like it was church. They come back. They're lined up around the corner, to receive this blessing, and it's a wonderful experience. But these are all people who are kind of like the Crown Candy, expats. They're just gone. They're wherever they are in different cities or much further west or south or whatever the case may be of where they used to live, because Old North St. Louis was a more densely populated neighborhood back in the mid 20th century, as well as Hyde Park and College Hill. These were more densely populated. But we know that when desegregation hit, there was white flight. Many people kind of moved away, and so a lot of the fabric that kind of held these neighborhoods together were gone. And if you leave behind people who have to think about survival more than making sure that the neighborhood is thriving, then you don't necessarily have the same kind of I would say cultural capital or human resources to make sure that these spaces remain as vibrant as they once did. So they kind of have to remake themselves. And I think the Old North has done a great job of having people or residents there who care about the neighborhood, as well as people who might not share the same income bracket, but they are participating in a meaningful way to keeping the neighborhood strong and vibrant and things of that nature. And so the bottom line for us is that we want to make sure that we are a part of the conversation where people are staying in the region and hopefully contributing to their neighborhoods in a meaningful way.
And that is an empowerment. When what you're talking about,
Absolutely.
MK, is really being able to utilize the capital that you have right there. And again, it goes back to valuation. You see, if people don't feel valued because they're looking at a different standard that has been set falsely, and then on their behalf, then they're always going to feel enabled versus empowered. Yeah. And so what you're talking about is really empowering the neighborhoods that then empowers the region.
Yeah.
And that can be done. I mean, just this platform alone is open to people just like what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. We do reach far and wide, and we would love to have more artists like that be able to utilize this platform to share their knowledge and their expertise and their vision. Because that's really what it is. It's a vision for this region. So, you all are always welcome to use this platform.
Excellent. Thank you.
What a tremendous service that you're giving back to your community and providing this Oasis launch pad.
That's right. Oasis. I love
Oasis launch pad.
Yeah, I'm writing that down
I
right
better
now.
write this down.
Oasis.
I'll forget
Trademark that.
Yeah,
That's right.
we'd all forget this one, but that's okay.
For budding artists and poets and
Yes.
anybody involved in the arts, because it's just not poetry or art, is it?
No, absolutely not. It's absolutely. So we're a multidisciplinary arts organization. So it's music, it's poetry, it's visual art. It's some fashion, because actually our board chair, she is a fashion instructor, a fashion professor at Lindenwood University.
Wow.
So we incorporate as many different art forms. I guess the way to think about it, we're much more interested in servicing marginalized art forms and marginalized artists. So, for example, there is a group that works in Old North St. Louis. They're circus artists, and they do a lot of traveling and things of that nature. And they're not black; they're white. They're just really good people, period, who want to just do some work. And so they came to Urb Arts and said, we would love to do some work with some young people, and we just happened to be able to facilitate that. And so they've been doing summer camps and engaging all kinds of young people for a long time. But now imagine an organization that's black-led that's working with white artists who are doing great things in the community for everybody. So there's a perspective shift there that hopefully we can continue to be a part of.
Very cool. MK Stallings, thanks for coming in today. We greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks, MK. This was
Thank
great.
you.
Great conversation.
You're listening to Arnold Stricker and Ellie Wharton of In Tune, and this is KW